Hello and welcome back to Myths and Misadventures from the National Hellenic Museum. My name is Cairo and I am your storyteller. In this series, I share a story about gods, heroes, and monsters from Greek mythology each episode, and today I'm going to tell you the story of Jason and the Argonauts. The version of the story that I will be telling today will be familiar. It also comes from Mortals and Immortals of Greek Mythology, as some of our other stories have. And without further ado, let's get mythical. Jason the Argonaut. Jason was born in Thessaly, in the port of Iolcus. From the first day of his life, the ocean sang him to sleep, and he grew used to the rolling waves and the cries of seagulls. But because his uncle, Peleus, had stolen the throne from his father, the legitimate king, his mom thought it prudent to distance themselves. She feared for her son's life, since he was the true heir to the kingdom. She trusted him to Chiron, a centaur, who lived in the forest on Mount Pelion. Chiron wasn't like the other centaurs. Though he, too, was half man, half horse, they were loud and easily angered, whereas he was wise and learned. He taught Jason to respect nature, heal man and animal alike, and resist fatigue, a useful skill for his future adventure across the seas. After several years, Jason decided to return to Iolcus and reclaim what was rightfully his. He had left the forest, bidding his master goodbye, and came to a river. An old woman who was unable to cross was crying at the shore. "Madam, climb on my back and I'll take you across the river." The old woman was heavier than he thought. She was actually Hera, the goddess, in disguise in order to test him. She and Athena wanted to know if Jason was worthy of the plans that they had in mind for him. When he arrived at Peleus' court, Jason was soaked to the bone, caked in mud, and missing a sandal he had lost in the river. But still he looked proud. Peleus looked at the younger man and began to tremble. He had been told that a man wearing only one sandal would do him harm. "Who are you and what do you want?" he asked, his voice rough. Without taking a knee, Jason told him. "You're my nephew and you want to take my throne. The audacity! But you're right, I'm getting old, and I grow tired of ruling. I am ready to hand over the kingdom, but only on one condition. Find me the golden fleece which once belonged to our town of Iolcus. It is in the garden of the god of war, Ares, and guarded by a dragon. It belongs to King Aeetes of Colchis, who is the son of Apollo. Surely you're not afraid of such a long journey to an unknown land at the feet of the Caucasus Mountains near the Black Sea." "Afraid? Me? As soon as I find a ship, I'll go," said Jason. Jason had his friend Argo build a large ship for him, one that would be crewed by 50 rowers, and they named the ship the Argo after its builder. The members of the team would be the Argonauts, and they had Athena watching over them. Jason sent messengers to all of the kingdoms of Greece to find companions for his journey. All the most valiant young men of his generation came running. Among them were the sons of gods and kings themselves. The twins, Castor and Pollux, Helen's brothers, Hercules and his young friend Hylas, Meleager from Calydon, Peleus, who would become Achilles' father, a different one, Laertes, who would become Odysseus' father, and Atalanta, the only woman on board respected for her skill with the bow. You might hear about her in another story on another day. When they were finally ready, they made sacrifices to the gods and they set out to sea. Orpheus, the poet, played his lyre and set the pace for the rowers. The Argo made numerous stops, sometimes pleasant and sometimes dangerous. On the island of Cyzicus, the king was getting married and so invited the Argonauts. 2 Argonauts were guarding the ship, listening to the sounds of the party, when they were attacked by 6 armed giants. They managed to hold their own against the giants, but couldn't stop them from running away and complaining to their sister, the goddess Rhea. Rhea was so angry that after leaving Cyzicus, the Argo was thrown back onto the coast by a violent storm and was stuck there. Taking advantage of a brief gap in the storm, a halcyon, a mythical bird said to be a sign of peace, flew down onto the bow of the ship and began to chirp. "What is it saying?" Jason asked, turning to Mopsus, an Argonaut who could speak the language of birds. "One moment. I'm listening. Yes. The storm was sent by Rhea. She was angry that we hurt her brothers." How can we make it up to her?" Jason asked. "One moment. I'm listening. She says we should raise a statue for her and have a ceremony in her honor. Argos took a piece of driftwood off the beach and sculpted a woman from it. The others planted it in the sand and danced around as Hercules gave them a rhythm to dance to with his mace. Satisfied, the goddess granted them favorable winds. They reached the Sea of Marmara and stopped on another island to procure food and drink. The terrible King Amycos refused to supply them. Proud of his talent as a boxer, he challenged them, like he did with all strangers, a boxing match to the death. "We're going to teach him a lesson," said Jason. "Pollux, you are Zeus's son and you say you're the best boxer in the world. Prove it." Amycos was heavier than Pollux and wore gloves studded with iron, but Pollux was faster and, most importantly, more intelligent. He carefully studied his opponent before letting loose. As the fight wore on, Amycos was furious. His face bloodied, his lips busted. He rushed at Pollux. But Pollux dodged and struck back, breaking the bone in his temple. Amycos was dead, and the world was rid of another monster. Next, they had to cross the Bosphorus Strait. They stopped on the way to seek advice from Phineus, a blind seer, who told Jason, "If you hope to succeed, you must pray to the goddess of love, Aphrodite." Then he explained how he could cross the clashing rocks. 2 blue rocks stand at each end of the Bosphorus. They're barely visible in the fog and close in on any ship that tries to cross the strait. But if you set a dove free, it will rest on one of the rocks and you'll be able to pass through unharmed. The Argonauts followed his advice and after reaching the Black Sea continued on their quest. At the time, Hercules and Hylas set off on their own quest, leaving the Argonauts to continue on without them. Eventually, after many difficulties, they reached the mouth of a river. In the distance, they could make out a tall mountain range. "The Caucasus!" cried Jason. They had made it to Colchis. They hid their boat in a cove and made their way towards the king's palace. Aeetes received them courteously, but when Jason revealed the reason why they had come so far, his attitude changed and he declared, "You can take the fleece if you can yoke 2 wild bulls to a chariot and plant a dragon's teeth in plowed soil. Warriors will grow from them and you will have to defeat them. What do you say?" "I accept," said Jason, though he didn't hesitate to reply. Deep inside, he was in despair. Medea did her best to help. She was Aeetes' daughter, the sun's granddaughter, priestess of the moon, and a magician. She was tall with black wavy hair that fell to the floor. Due to Aphrodite's influence, she fell in love with Jason at first sight. She was angry at her father for making such unreasonable demands. So, that night, she set out in secret, on her own, and followed the Argonauts back to their ship. She gave Jason an oil for him to cover himself with so he could better tame the bulls. She also gave him a magic rock and told him how to use it. "I will save your life," she said. "I'm betraying my country and my father for your sake. In exchange, take me with you and swear you'll marry me." Jason swore to all the gods that he would be her loyal husband for the rest of his life. The trials were set to begin early the following morning, in a vast hilled field. The people of Colchis were there in great numbers waiting for the show, while the Argonauts waited and worried. First, they let the bulls loose. They stomped the ground with their bronze hooves and breathed fire. The crowd was screaming in both fear and excitement. Jason walked forward, brave and bold, and set his hand on the beast's head. They allowed themselves to be hitched to the chariot and worked for the rest of the day. That night, Jason planted the dragon's teeth. Armed warriors sprang forth from the ground, their weapons gleaming in the light of the setting sun. They were holding javelins, all pointed towards the Argonauts. The audience was breathless, standing, trying to get a better view. Medea trembled in fear and spoke a spell to protect the man she loved. Free of any doubt, Jason threw the magic stone in the middle of the warriors. They turned to look at each other, surprised, and began to argue. It quickly escalated into battle, and by the end, not one remained alive. The Argonauts celebrated their victory and sought out their prize from Aeetes, but the king was angry and refused to give up the fleece. Jason and Medea waited until late into the night before sneaking into Ares' garden. Medea used her magic to make the dragon fall asleep, and Jason grabbed the fleece. They ran back to their ship, pulling up their anchor, as soon as they got on board. When the Argonauts made it back to Iolcus, they expected congratulations. But they were disappointed. Jason's father had died, and Peleus, who had pushed Jason's father into despair, refused to give up his throne in exchange for the Golden Fleece as they had agreed. Medea took vengeance for her husband. Using her magic, she killed Peleus. She and Jason were banished and took refuge in Corinth. They lived there quietly for 10 years. They had 2 sons. But when the Corinthians appreciated Jason for his strength, they feared the strange sorceress Medea. She suffered for it and regretted leaving her country. She had abandoned everything to follow the man she still loved so passionately. But he had grown tired of her. One day, Creon, the king of Corinth, suggested Jason send Medea home and instead marry his daughter, Creusa. He could keep his sons here with him and later inherit the kingdom. Jason accepted. Medea lost her husband, home, and sons, who would be treated as prisoners in Creon's palace. No, they'd be better off dead. She arranged to have a beautiful wedding dress sent to Creusa. When the young woman received it, the dress burst into flames. The fire spread to the rest of the palace, killing all of those within. Jason managed to escape by jumping out of a window. After having killed her sons, Medea took off, flying away on a chariot pulled by dragons. As for Jason, he raised an army and conquered Iolcus, where he reigned for a long time. Now that you've heard the story of Jason and the Argonauts, there may have been some events in the tale that remind you of other parts of stories you've heard here, such as similarities between the roles of Ariadne and Medea in helping the hero in their quest. Their participation in the story is in some ways similar, but in some ways it's also very different. Medea herself also featured in the story of Theseus, though her appearance there takes place chronologically after her time with Jason. Similarly, you will hear the story of Atalanta in our next episode of Myths and Misadventures, and she's the only woman to join the crew of the Argo during this tale today. Each of these myths is heavily connected to the wider web of Greek mythology, and observing how these stories relate to each other and how they interact can make engaging with them a much more richer and expansive experience. So I encourage you to always think about how these tales connect to the other ones that you've heard in the larger canon that is Greek mythology. If you would like to draw the events of today's story as you imagine them and feel like sharing, ask a parent to help you submit them to the National Hellenic Museum, and we may share your version with others on our social media. I would deeply love to see your take, as always. Information on how to submit your artwork is in the description of this video. I hope I captured your imagination today, and I look forward to sharing another story from Greek mythology with you soon. Until next time, stay mythical.